For over a millennium, the damp, suffocating darkness of the crypt held its secret in silence. In 1952, when archaeologist Alberto Ruiz Luillier finally pried open the massive limestone slab deep within the bowels of the Temple of Inscriptions, he was met not with the dust of the dead, but with the heavy, humid air of the jungle that had seeped through the stone. Lying there, encased in a sarcophagus carved with terrifying complexity, was a skeleton whose face was masked in a mosaic of jade shards. This was K'inich Janaab Pakal. But strip away the modern conspiracy theories about ancient astronauts and spaceships that have clouded his legacy. The reality of Pakal is far more desperate and human. He was not a visitor from the stars, but a survivor of a brutal, collapsing world. Born into a city that had been sacked, humiliated, and brought to its knees by rival powers, Pakal defied the odds to reign for 68 years, one of the longest tenures in planetary history. He inherited a ruin and left behind a masterpiece, obsessed with immortality not because of vanity, but because he spent his entire life proving that his broken lineage was still favored by the gods. Welcome back to the Earthen Dawn. Today, we descend into the humid corridors of Palenque to uncover the true story of the Red Queen's son, the architect of the jungle, and the king who conquered death itself. To understand the colossal weight resting on Pakal's shoulders, we must first look at the ashes he was born into. The Palenque we see today, with its soaring temples and white limestone crests, did not exist when he entered the world in 603 AD. Instead, the city, known to its inhabitants as Lakamha, was a wounded animal, bleeding out in the jungle. The ruling dynasty had not just been defeated. It had been systematically dismantled by the superpower of the Maya lowlands, the Khan, or Snake Dynasty, operating from the distant metropolis of Calakmul. The trauma began in 599 AD, 4 years before Pakal's birth, when the Snake Kings struck Lakamha with devastating precision. But the death blow seemed to land in 611 AD. Historical inscriptions record this moment with a chilling simplicity, stating that the flint and shield of the city's patron deity was taken down. In the Maya worldview, this was not merely a military loss. It was a theological catastrophe. It meant that the gods had been captured. The protective barriers of the spiritual world had been shattered, and the king at the time had failed in his primary duty to maintain cosmic order. When Pakal looked around his childhood home, he would have seen the physical scars of this humiliation. Temples were likely defaced, stelae toppled, and the elite class decimated. The psychological atmosphere was one of abandonment. The previous ruler had died in the aftermath of the defeat, leaving a power vacuum that threatened to swallow the city whole. There were no great monuments being built, no grand festivals celebrated. There was only the silence of a city that had lost its soul. It was in this vacuum of despair that a radical, desperate plan was hatched. Not by a warrior, but by a mother who refused to let her lineage die. On July 29, 615 AD, the heavy burden of a crumbling city was placed on the head of a 12-year-old boy. K'inich Janaab Pakal ascended the throne not amidst the cheers of a conquering army, but in a ceremony shadowed by political fragility. In the eyes of the Maya elite, His claim to power was dangerously thin. Traditional Maya kingship was strictly patrilineal, passing from father to son. Pakal's father, Hicks, was a nobleman of high status, but he was not a king. The royal blood that flowed into Pakal came exclusively from his mother, Lady Sak-Kuk. By the rigid laws of succession, this should have disqualified him, or at least invited immediate usurpation by rival noble houses. That Pakal survived his coronation is a testament to the iron will of Lady Sak-Kuk. She stands as one of the most formidable political operators in Mesoamerican history. Far from retreating into the background, she orchestrated her son's rise as a necessary deviation to save the dynasty. The famous oval palace tablet, carved to immortalize this moment, does not show a warrior king seizing power. It depicts Sak-Kuk handing the drum major headdress, the insignia of royal authority, to her young son. The symbolism is blatant and deliberate. She is the source of his power. For the first few decades of his reign, it is almost certain that Pakal was merely the face of the throne, while Sak-Kuk held the true reins of government. She had to navigate a minefield of internal dissent and external threats from the Snake Kingdom. To legitimize this unorthodox transfer of power, the royal court began a massive propaganda campaign, rewriting the city's mythology to equate Sak-Kuk with the primordial mother goddess who birthed the gods at the beginning of time. If the gods could inherit power through a mother, so could Pakal. This was not just a coronation. It was a desperate political gamble to stitch together a lineage that had been severed by war. Pakal understood a fundamental truth of power. If you cannot rely on tradition, you must invent a new one. With his throne secured by his mother's maneuvering, but his legitimacy still questioned by the old guard, the young king launched an architectural crusade that would transform Palenque from a provincial outpost into a theater of divine theater. He did not build simply for vanity. He built to silence his critics. Every frieze, every stucco mask, and every inscription commissioned during this period had a singular, relentless purpose: to prove that K'inich Janaab Pakal was not an accident of history, but a necessity of the cosmos. The epicenter of this transformation was the palace itself. Pakal expanded this complex into a labyrinth of administrative power and ritual sanctity, painting the limestone structures in such vibrant shades of red that the city would have glowed like an ember against the deep green of the jungle. Inside these halls, he executed his boldest theological maneuver. He commanded his scribes to carve narratives that reinterpreted the very creation of the world, aligning the birth of the three patron gods of Palenque with his own birthday and that of his mother. This era marked the crystallization of the title Kuhul Bakal Aja, the Divine Lord of the Bone. The sensory experience of the city shifted dramatically. The smell of burning copal incense would have drifted constantly through the new corridors, and the sound of chisels on stone became the heartbeat of the capital. Pakal was physically rewriting the memory of the humiliation his city had suffered, covering the scars of the past with a facade of absolute, unshakable permanence. With his legitimacy chiseled into the public consciousness, Pakal turned his ambition toward the physical mastery of his environment. The transformation of Palenque during the middle years of his reign represents one of the greatest feats of engineering in the pre-Columbian Americas. The city was built on a narrow, unstable shelf of the Sierra de Don Juan, crisscrossed by running streams. For a lesser ruler, this terrain was a nightmare. For Pakal, it was a canvas. He didn't just build on the land, he reshaped the hydrology of the mountain itself. The most spectacular achievement of this era was the taming of the Otalam River. This perennial stream cut directly through the center of the city, limiting the space available for the grand plazas Pakal envisioned. His engineers constructed a massive vaulted aqueduct, burying the river beneath a stone tunnel so strong that it supports the heavy weight of the main plaza to this day. Recent hydraulic studies have revealed that the intricate design of the intake narrowed specifically to create hydraulic pressure, essentially creating the first pressurized water system in the New World. Above this subterranean network, the palace complex continued to grow, evolving into a masterpiece of light and air. Pakal commissioned House E, the only building in the complex painted entirely white, known as the Sak Nuk Na, or White Skin House. This was the throne room, the sanctum sanctorum, where the king consulted with his ancestors. Unlike the heavy, fortress-like architecture of other Maya cities, Pakal's Palenque was defined by its mansard roofs and wide doorways, designed to catch the cooling breeze and filter the jungle light. The dark days of military humiliation were over. Exotic goods from distant trade routes flowed into the markets, and the city swelled with a population that saw their king not just as a survivor, but as a provider of abundance. Lakamha had become the jewel of the Western Maya world. But peace in the ancient Maya world was never a permanent state. It was merely the breath taken between wars. While Pakal reshaped the skyline of his city, the geopolitical storm that had nearly destroyed his childhood never fully dissipated. The Khan, or Snake dynasty of Calakmul, remained the hegemon of the lowlands, a superstate that operated like a suffocating python, surrounding Palenque with hostile proxy states. To survive, Pakal had to be more than a builder. He had to be a warlord capable of feeding the gods with the blood of his enemies. The stone records of the palace courtyard reveal the grim reality of this struggle. In 659 AD, the 56-year-old king launched a decisive military campaign to break the encirclement, targeting the western cities of Santa Elena and Pomona. These were not mere border skirmishes, but calculated strikes to dismantle the alliances threatening his kingdom. The campaign was a resounding success. Pakal's forces returned not with gold, but with the most valuable currency of the era: living, high-ranking captives. In the east court of the palace, visible to any visiting diplomat, Pakal commissioned humiliated portraits of these defeated lords. They are depicted not in their finery, but stripped of their jade, their hair unbound in a sign of utter shame, kneeling in submission. These carvings served a dual purpose. They were a terrifying warning to the Snake Kingdom's allies and a ritual assertion of Pakal's vitality. In the Maya worldview, the king was the conduit of cosmic energy. By capturing and sacrificing rival elites, Pakal was publicly demonstrating that he possessed the spiritual heat necessary to sustain the universe. As the decades passed and Pakal approached his 80th year, the vibrant energy of the Builder King turned inward, obsessing over the one enemy he could not defeat on the battlefield: time. He did not intend to fade into the history books as a mere mortal. He intended to become a god. To ensure this, transfiguration, he commissioned his final and greatest masterpiece, the Temple of Inscriptions, known in ancient times as the Biolan Yejte Na, or House of the Nine Sharpened Spears. Unlike the tombs of Egyptian pharaohs or European monarchs, which were often dug into existing structures or hidden away, Pakal's tomb was the heart of the pyramid itself. The massive limestone edifice was constructed around his sarcophagus, sealing it in the womb of the mountain forever. The engineering of this monument reveals a man deeply concerned with the continued connection between the living and the dead. Architects designed a small, hollow tube running from the sarcophagus chamber, up through the tons of stone fill, and emerging on the temple floor at the summit. This psychoduct was a physical highway for the soul, a channel that allowed the spirit of the king to ascend and participate in the rituals performed by his descendants above. He was ensuring that even in death, he would remain the active spiritual anchor of the city. But the temple was not just a machine for resurrection. It was a final, immutable legal argument. On the walls of the upper sanctuary, Pakal ordered the carving of the longest known text in the Maya world. 3 massive limestone tablets containing 617 glyph blocks. These inscriptions do not simply list his conquests. They meticulously trace the history of the city back thousands of years, weaving the events of his reign into the deep time of cosmic mythology. In his final days, Pakal was not just preparing to die. He was carving a permanent defense of his controversial lineage into the bedrock of the world, daring the future to ever question his right to rule. On August 28, 683 AD, after 68 years of absolute rule, K'inich Janaab Pakal took his final breath. He was 80 years old, a lifespan that must have seemed miraculous in an era where few survived past 40. The funeral procession that carried his body up the steps of the Temple of Inscriptions was not burying a man, but planting a seed. His corpse, wrapped in cinnabar red cloth, was lowered down the narrow, vaulted stairway into the heart of the pyramid, a journey simulating the descent into the watery underworld of Xibalba. Here, in the cool dampness of the crypt, the priests sealed him within a sarcophagus that would confuse the modern world 1,000 years later. The massive limestone lid, weighing several tons, does not depict an ancient astronaut piloting a spacecraft, as pseudo-historians have claimed. Instead, it captures a moment of profound theological terror and hope. Pakal is shown falling backward into the skeletal jaws of the earth monster, descending the world tree to the roots of the universe. He is caught in the liminal space between death and rebirth, destined to emerge again like the maze god. To ensure this eternal identity, a mosaic mask of green jade was placed over his face, an imperishable stone skin that would never rot, fixing his features forever in a state of youthful, divine perfection. The heavy stone door was slid into place, sealing the timeline of the most significant ruler in Maya history, leaving him to navigate the dark waters of the afterlife alone. The death of the Sun King did not immediately plunge Palenque into darkness. His eldest son, K'inich Janaab II, ascended the throne and dutifully completed the final stucco decorations of his father's tomb, ensuring the spiritual machinery was fully operational. For a brief generation, the city continued to shine, but the seeds of collapse were already sown in the wider Maya world. Over the next century, the delicate balance of warfare, environmental stress, and political overreach that Pakal had managed to hold at bay finally snapped. By the 9th century, the aqueducts were clogged with silt, the palaces were empty, and the jungle began its slow, relentless reclamation of La Kamha. For 1,000 years, the howler monkeys were the only kings of Palenque. The great stucco masks of Pakal were eroded by rain and covered in moss. Yet, in a twist of fate that the king himself might have appreciated, his obsession with permanence won in the end. While the wooden lintels rotted, and the books of bark paper disintegrated into dust, the Temple of Inscriptions held its ground against the roots and the rot. When the modern world finally broke the seal of his tomb, K'inich Janaab Pakal emerged not as a forgotten chieftain, but as the most recognizable face of an entire civilization. He had gambled everything on the belief that stone could defeat time. And looking at his jade mask today, staring back at us from behind the glass of a museum, we are forced to admit, he was right. History is not just what is written, it is what survives. Subscribe to our channel to relive heroic history pages